Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Ayana Lokhandwala. She is a visionary with a passion for design, personal empowerment, and community building. Welcome to the show, Ayana.
Thank you. Thank you, Ajay, for hosting me and having me on your show.
You're welcome. Welcome to the show, Ayana. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll be talking about designing for positive change. So we will certainly talk about this thing. But first, a bit about you, Ayana, so that people know about your journey, so that they know more directly from you.
So I'm right now a graduate of architecture and I am currently in Melbourne and I graduated I think this year. And right now my goals is that I'm trying to get into humanitarian architecture, looking at ways to sort of help marginalized communities through design and positive change. So that's my goal right now. But on the side, I also run a marketing company and I manage that as well as being an architect. And that's a little about me.
Wonderful, wonderful, Ayana. So when you talk of humanitarian architect, being a humanitarian architect, how should a common person in a small place understand what this is all about? Because many a times when they talk about architect, people think about buildings. When they
Yeah.
talk about designing, they think about fashion and all. And you are yourself a fashion designer, though you call yourself a modest fashion designer. So
Yeah.
I want to understand first the humanitarian architect part from a common person's understanding.
Yeah. So the thing is, the humanitarian architecture isn't a very common term. So even in the industry, it's not a very common practice. It's now becoming very there's a bit of awareness now to this than it was before, and even the scope for humanitarian architecture is still low. So it's quite understandable that even a common person may not understand what humanitarian architecture is about. But just to explain in simple terms, it's basically designing for people or communities that are underprivileged, going through, let's say, a war, going through some sort of a natural disaster or economic crisis, and they need redevelopment. So I guess that's when humanitarian architecture comes in, where we try to help communities that are underprivileged through design. And in that, it basically requires us to kind of get communities together and, get supplies for building materials. It's not about really profit. It's more about giving back to the community. So we source materials and everything that we need from either local suppliers or international, and then we try to build and support and sustain the local communities across the world. So that's what really humanitarian architecture really means.
Right, right. So how does it differ from NGOs working in a particular field or a government, initiative into a particular field? Uh, is it the same thing, different thing, except the way people work is a bit different? Help us understand from that point of view, especially from an NGO point of view, or is it the same thing?
So from an NGO perspective, the thing is, you don't have to go through an NGO to become a humanitarian architect. You can do it as an individual, like you can form your own NGO. You can do it as an independent architect who's willing to help. But a lot of the times people do it through NGOs because it's much more easier to kind of get donations and support than doing it independently. But I guess it both involves the same sort of work. You as an architect, suppose, I'm doing the same sort of work whether I was to do it through NGO or governmental or independently. But the only thing sometimes with the government is that there are some restrictions that we have to work with, or they define certain guidelines and we have to work. And whereas when you're working independently, there's a bit more freedom and will. And again, to work independently, it's not a really popular thing to work as an independent humanitarian architect. It's a very new thing. So generally people work through NGOs because it's much easier to access all the tools that are necessary.
Right, right, Ayana. So you talked about the challenges. What are the main challenges that you face in this sort of work? And where are the places from where you can get support from? Why I'm asking it, so that people from other parts of the world, they can understand these things, and uh, those who want to go through, they set their expectations right, that okay, these are the challenges we'll fight, and it's not just about all the big talks, but it is about a lot of groundwork that needs to be done.
Yeah. So like personally, I'm at an early stage of my profession right now, and like I went I like went to a lecture 2 3 years ago, and that's where I was talking about opportunities for humanitarian architect. And and I spoke to a couple professionals even quite recently as well. And the problem with humanitarian architecture is that, first of all, like getting into the profession is hard itself. And then there is no, to be a humanitarian architect, there is no simple path, like a straightforward pathway to get there. There is no degree, that there's no specialization in architecture called humanitarian architecture. You become that through experience, you become that through networks and connections. So that's the main challenge, I guess. So if I want to go and be like, I want to become a humanitarian architect, I really just can't just do that. I first need industry experience. I need to get connections, and I need the right sort of people that have the right sort of mindset. And then, so in Australia, we have a practice called Architects Without Architects on Frontiers, or Without Frontiers. So there is a firm here that is NGO based, that offers humanitarian aid. And so like a couple of years ago in Australia, there was I'm sure you would know, there was bushfires here
Yeah,
in
right.
Australia. So what they did was, a lot of these like a lot of these countryside homes were destroyed because of the fire. So Architects Without Frontiers came in and sorry if I'm saying the name wrong. So they came in and um, got the supplies from local providers and built like these instant temporary homes and helped the communities through innovative design solutions. Now, this is, I guess, the only kind of firm that exists that offers this sort of aid. There isn't any other else, and there might be across the world, but in Australia or in Melbourne, widely, this is the only one. So it's sometimes it's just very hard to get in, because the scope is so small to get in, to work in this sort of sector. And the thing is, if you look at the world, there's so much need for these sort of things. Like if you look across the world, there's something happening. Either the people are being affected by wars, they're being affected by natural disasters, or even just the way like a lot of cities are developed. Especially in Melbourne, we have people are just spreading out and out into the land. We have a problem with urban sprawl. The way cities are designed, they're not designed well to sustain. So we're kind of creating a lot of damage to the environment. So there's a lot of things that need sort of, you know, addressing. There is no, not a single pathway to get there. And I think that's what right now this industry lacks. And for more diversity and for humanitarian architecture, or architecture for with a strong, community or humanitarian purpose, to have a pathway to get into it.
Right, right, Anna. So I want to understand that, do we need certain qualifications to be a humanitarian architect, or anyone can become a humanitarian architect? How does that work?
So to be a humanitarian architect, you just need to be an architect. So in Australia, or it's like a 5 years course, and I think in India it's 7 years of course. So once you've become an architect and you've got the experience, you're licensed, and so that's very important. That first you finish your qualifications, and then you get your license, and then the second most important step is that you get your experience, because like humanitarian architecture, you're dealing with a lot of challenges than normal construction. There's the
Yeah.
kind of geography you're working with, or you're working with histories, you're working with so many factors. So you kind of need a level of experience and a level of, I guess, insight that only comes with experience. So there is, in short, there is no clear path. Like there's no I guess, specific, like I said before, way to become a humanitarian architect. You just, any architect can become one.
Right, right, Anna. So I want to understand, how do you, there are so many issues in the world, in different parts of the world.
Yeah.
how do you decide who needs your help, who needs your help first? There are so many marginalized communities, so
Yeah.
many vulnerable people everywhere in each part of the world. So I want to understand. Sometimes it can be, uh, when you choose, it can be a very difficult task sometimes. So I want to understand that part. How does a designer work around that?
Yeah. I think there's two ways. My personal belief is that you should start with people and communities that are around you first before you go further out and help others. Um, so like first of all, help your own local community. If, for example, if there's another instance where in Australia, in Melbourne or around surrounding countries need help, like humanitarian support from architects, then I think that's the first set of communities I would love to support. But it's also about being on more on practical side. How do we, like, let's say I want to become a humanitarian architect. It's like, how do I get my help delivered? So sometimes there are organizations that operate in certain parts of the country, and they may not be in Australia, they may not be in the surrounding countries, they might be all the way in Africa or let's say Fiji. So I sometimes the opportunities are not as big as you think, and then you have to work with what's practical and what's out there and what NGOs are offering.
Right, right, Ayana. So one aspect I wanted to understand is that when you set out to work on a project, do you have a timeline that, okay, this is what we will deliver, this is what we will achieve, and then we expect the community or the vulnerable community to be standing on its own feet, that it does
So
not become, you know so that it does not become a habit for them to just, because after some time all this starts becoming an industry, and then starts suiting a certain type of people outside from the industry or from the NGO perspective. I want to understand from that perspective.
yeah. So I think it's all first of all begins with clear intentions, and if you're someone who's genuine in their own intention that we want to help these communities, it's not for some profit or external party profit. Then I think like any project we take on, there's always a clear intention, our goal, what we want to achieve through the project, and then we have a timeline, a time frame where everything is set, how the project will be used and utilized, and what's the end goal. So we do have these sort of set out, but sometimes in the world, like things like the outcome is not as what we have expected. So we try our best as designers, as individuals, to deliver the best possible outcome for our clients, whether they're someone that's paying us or whether they're marginalized communities. But in the end, sometimes you may not, like, the results that you get may not be what you initially wanted. So there have been cases where architects have produced, for example, provided humanitarian aid, but once it was delivered, it was used not in the way we had intended, but any other way. And sometimes that's okay, and in other times it's not, because these places are then taken over by someone else, and there's a lot of politics to it. So what happens after the delivery stage is not really in our hands, but the way we design is what it's, because we're designers. So how we design, what we design, and to make sure that these designs are made with the materials are taken in consideration of the climate, local environment, the ground conditions, everything is, and it's sustainable. And these are the factors that we can control, and not the ones what happens after stage, but we can try our best before that, before it's been delivered.
Right, right. And Ayana, because it's the world is changing so fast, so many interests are in every aspect of the things, good or bad, that we do. How does an individual, especially who is a humanitarian architect and designer, how
Yeah,
do they keep themselves away from the politics of it, or
yeah,
the vested interest from the industry side of it?
yeah.
That you are not playing into the wrong hands, and that your intention may be correct, but you have to also see that it is well protected from those vested interests.
Yeah.
interests. How does it is not an easy thing to do, because you also need money for all these things. So I want to understand, as a some sort of guideline for people who might be wanting to venture out into this particular line.
Yeah. So the thing is that it has been a long battle between architects and government and politics, because more than we want, these sort of organizations take control of our work, and it's always been a matter of um tug and pull. Like, we're trying to fight for our designs, we're trying to fight for what we want to do, and then this is governmental body that's taking a higher authority and it's controlling us. So there's always this pressure on both ends. So it's really hard to say, especially someone who wants to venture out in this industry. We can't, like, you can't, I can't guaranteeingly say that governments won't interfere in your project. Most of the time they will interfere, and it's sometimes, if you're lucky, you might get away with it, but most of the time there will be some sort of restrictions that you have to work with. And as architects, we're designers, we imagine a lot. So in our imaginary world, we do imagine a world of designs where we design per our wishes, where we're not restricted by guidelines and rules and policies. But when in the real world, a lot of our designs and what we want to do has been limited because of these higher bodies that want to control the project so it benefits them.
Right, right, Anna. One last question I wanted to understand was that,
Yeah.
being so close to not so many good things in life that you work, try to alleviate, and you can only do as much as you can.
Yeah.
Then how do you emotionally, mentally protect yourself at the same time? Help those people. For a medical person, they are mentally trained for this, but for a humanitarian architect, are they also trained for this, or they have to do it themselves?
So no, we're not trained at all. So this is one thing that a person has to kind of keep in mind before they step into this sort of world, that you'll be seeing things that are not something that you see in your day-to-day lives, and it will take a
Right.
toll on your mental health. And you might have to seek a psychologist, because you don't know how to cope with it, because as a doctor they are trained. For us, this just speaking of as an architect, that is not a challenge that we face. So adding that layer on, that now that is a challenge, I think number one, you need to be honest to yourself and be prepared that this will have. And if you know that you're someone who's very emotional and is someone who's going to get caught up by these issues, then I think it's best to avoid it, because there's no point in harming yourself and trying to help someone else. So if it's very important that you mentally prepare yourself and see if it's something that you can cope with, or at least learn strategies or seek help before you even step into the field. Like, there were times where I there were things I professionally wanted to do, but there were so many things that it's called, like, I was having internal challenges, and to deal with that I did seek psychologists, and they really helped me changed my mindset around those things. And so when I was able to again step into the field, I was able to cope with it, because the strategies helped me cope with certain internal challenges that I was facing. So these are a few things I'd suggest, that either be honest to yourself, or take some help beforehand to deal with these certain scenarios, and hopefully either of them help you decide whether it's for you or not.
Right, right. There is much to understand and learn from you about all these things. And as time goes on, you yourself you are setting out onto this journey. So, how have you planned your future around this thing, as well as also around being a fashion designer? Then,
Yeah.
what is the
So that's
path
one.
that you have sought for yourself going forward?
Yeah. So I think I didn't clarify before, but I'm a enthusiast fashion designer. So I am
Right.
it's in the pipe. So fashion design is in the pipeline. It's something that I'm like working in the background. But the thing with me is that I'm the sort of person who's very experimental. I can't do one thing for all of my life. So even with architecture, I want to get experience. I want to do one or two projects that helps these communities, but I don't see myself staying in this one profession for the rest of my life. So I'm sort and fashion design was something that I liked as a child. So for me, it's more like, being being able to work in an environment where I can switch between like careers. For example, do architecture, maybe do it on a contract base, do that, and then work on another project or work side by side based on how the work pressure is and how the way that aligns with my schedule. So right now my goal is just to like work as an architect. I also I'm not I said earlier that I run a marketing agency. It's a small social media marketing agency, and I run that on the side with as I work with in architecture. And then the goal is that in future I will be launching my own fashion, modest fashion design brand, but that's still in the works. Yeah.
Right, right. As I said, there's much to learn about all these things from you, Ayana, and I'm sure a lot of people would like to connect with you, know more about you, more about your work. So, what is the best way for them to do so?
The best way is that I've actually recently made my Instagram public, and I got it. Like, I think one thing I just want to tell everyone is that if you're earlier in life, it's very important that you get yourself a mentor, because mentors will really guide you into stepping foot into your career and sorting how you should get to your goals. So because of through her help, I was able to make my Instagram public, and where I'm
Right.
sharing my journey as an architect and as as a person who's interested in fashion. So I think I'm not sure how you're gonna share your my handle, but it's Ayana_is_flower on Instagram. I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can connect there as well, and you'll find a bit more information about me in over there too.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.